One thing we know already is at least these two trees at least have a lot of vole issues on them, and you know, maybe we'll find they all will. So any way we look at it, that's going to put a real pressure on the plant itself.
If I could speak about the difference in the habit or the anatomy of these apple trees and that, just very briefly.
Well, let's ask. Take a look at this apple tree and this apple tree, and tell us if you notice anything.
Yeah, what is that tree telling you?
Very vertical growth.
Yeah.
That one's growing up.
Okay, and of apple trees that you've seen before, do they tend to be more like that or more like that?
More like that.
More like that. So maybe there's a little bit of flag of there could be something peculiar going on here, and or it may be a totally different growth pattern variety.
And that is exactly what I think the situation is. There has been continued interest in having what are called spur type varieties that are more upright, and more of their production is from spurs along that upright growth. And that's been particularly true in the past with spur type Red Delicious apples. Now this doesn't happen to, I don't think, be a Red Delicious. But in any event, that was great, whoever saw that the logical differences in anatomy is probably genetic, that its genes have told it to be going for the sky instead of spreading out and trying to get its sunlight that way.
Yeah, I think if it's a spur type apple, they've been developed to fruit vertically. A lot of other apple trees, you know, in a sense, the more horizontal you get, the more fruit buds you get. And the more vertical, the less. But this tree is different from that. However, I mean, I'm not an expert on this type of tree, but whenever I see one in a catalog, I look at it to see if it's any of the ones that are resistant to our major diseases in here. So far, I've not seen any. So the issue is, if you're wanting to do organic or beyond organic, is with that dense growth, which doesn't allow for sun and wind, air, to get through, you're going to have a lot of extra disease issues with it. So you've pretty much got to spray. Although this one, as far as I know, for the last several years has not been sprayed, right?
Actually, 3 years ago we started out strong with like oxidate and compost tea and things like that in the spring.
Yeah. But I mean, no toxic sprays.
Never.
Yeah.
Never. No. Yeah. We did the whole orchard with copper sulfate when we had really bad fire blight.
Okay.
We did the copper sulfate 2 times in a row because of bad fire blight, and then pruned it all out. And
okay.
That was in 2011, I think.
Okay. All right. So that's why.
I think a big take-home message about what we're doing, about the give and take, about the difference between the genetic difference between these two habits, is for a home orchardist, it's to think about the space that you have, because these more upright types actually fit into the space that a home orchardist has many times much better than one that's already 20 feet to 25 feet across like this. And as Andrew said, you can prune and move the tree in the direction you want it to go, and we're going to do some more talking about that as we progress. So I think the issue that we aren't dealing with at all yet is how to design a home orchard. Whoever designed this did do well in that they have several of the more interesting crops planted here, and it's planted in a place where the water moves off for the most part, so that it doesn't have wet feet, which is a problem of lack of oxygen. That part's relatively good. There's enough space between the peach that Sarah is under there and the plum that's over there. For the most part, there's enough space for trees that are on full vigor root systems, spaced out like they are here. But a lot of home orchards don't have much more space than what we see right here. And the question is, how many different kinds of crops you're actually going to try to grow in your home orchard? Are you just going to grow your favorite crop because that's all you have space for? You can certainly grow fruit trees in pots as well. I know Dwayne's starting to do that in my neighborhood. But you have to think about what space you have, and also the fact that there are potential needs for pollination and things that we're going to speak about as well. What are we going to do next? You're going to...
Well, I have a different take on this. Let me just, I need these two demonstration pieces here. I didn't have to ask permission because these are dead already. So
You don't need permission anyway.
I know. I meant from the plant. This one to me is a great example of, with the exception of this peach and that plum, everything else is way too close together. However, this is a beautiful example of, if that was the regular kind of apple tree, it would be way too close. But because it's upright, this one can grow out all at once and it's not touching it. And this is a good, this type of tree, if you can find disease resistance in the apple, is a great one to have in your orchard. If these ones were placed a little bit further apart, you could have a whole line of these interspersed and really get a lot of diversity. I started my orchard in '94, and that we didn't have a lot of, we didn't have like Useful Plants Nursery and Black Mountain, Reams Creek. So I got things through the mail, bare rooted, and you just get really a whip. It's not developed anything anywhere like this, but it's like, okay, I'm going to put my first one right here. Why don't you hold this, Nikki? It's like, okay, that's a tiny little thing, geez. They say 16 feet apart. That would be like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That would be, oh man, that little teeny thing. And this, no, I think this looks like it's probably okay right here, Would you hold that, Patrick? And so, it's like, oh man, I can get a lot of fruits in here now. Well, they get that big, they get bigger than that. And all of a sudden, the branches are growing into each other. And all of a sudden, there's a dead air zone. And all of a sudden, there's fire, blight, and disease that normally wouldn't be there. So you really got to space things out a bit more. These trees are, I've made the same mistake. I can say it. They're grossly too close together. So one of the things you may have been alluding to is by choice of particular rootstocks, the rootstock determines the size of the tree. So if you planted a full-size apple tree, by God, that thing can get 30 feet tall and 30 feet across. You got a little yard, one tree, and that could be great. You have a great tree, but by using rootstocks that gave you a dwarf or semi-dwarf or even smaller top above ground part, you could probably get 15 trees in that same space. So if you got lots of space, put in full-size trees, and especially if you're young and we're going to be climbing for the next 50 years. But otherwise, your rootstock is real important in determining what variety you're going to get. And then you can get a diverse planting, yeah.
So the rootstock that makes it dwarf or semi-dwarf or full size, is it also the rootstock that's determining that this is columnar, so that you could graft top work, some say gold rush on there, or something that is blight resistant for the area, and it would be growing upright?
The rootstock probably is not the cause of this habit that it has. The question that I thought you were going to ask is whether or not we could use this as an interstock, so that we have the root and then a piece of this, and whether it would influence the top if we grafted onto the top of that.
Cut some of those off and graft the blight resistant varieties onto it.
Well, I don't think enough is known about that particular question of how much you can affect the angle of the growth or the anatomy to know whether that's going to work. But I think the more logical thing to do is what Andrew was suggesting, and that is to take under consideration how big your yard is, or your orchard area, and how many different crops you're trying to plant into it, and what each one of those crops root systems can be, what you can purchase for them. In some cases you can buy dwarfing rootstocks that are well adapted to this region, and in other cases you can't. If you're starting off from scratch, it takes some real consideration as to what the area that you have we haven't talked anything about the soil amendment and getting the orchard soil actually ready.
But we're going to be covering all that this afternoon.
Okay, so I think, to me, the fact that he introduced and I'm happy that he did, introduce the idea that we could also, instead of having the 2 full vigor rootstocks that I talked about for cherries, he's introduced the idea that they probably are dwarfing rootstocks for cherries as well. Now, are there? They're good ones that are for sale to homeowners. So, are they good enough that it's worth paying extra for? Yeah, if you don't have very much space, you probably want to go ahead and pay a little more extra for the tree to get it. The reason you have to pay more extra for it is because most of the dwarfing rootstocks for cherries are clonal rootstocks that are patented, and the people that did the breeding to develop them are getting a royalty from each of those rootstocks that are sold. So you end up having to pay a little bit more for that tree. Patrick?
What about the theory that you can just prune any tree to the size you want it?
You can. You definitely can. However, it's a matter of how much energy is it going to take and how frequently. Something that wants to reach up 30 feet is always going to be trying to do that.
So what happens if you prune a full vigor rootstock really hard to keep it down so that it's 6 feet tall and 6 feet across in all directions, is it makes more growth than these shoots that are coming up here already 3 feet. They'll make, in this climate, they'll make 6 to 8 feet of growth in response to your having pruned them the way you did.
Yeah.
But will they bear fruit on all that growth, or are they just going to be struggling to grow because you've cut them back so far?
They don't bear fruit very well. It's that much vigor. That is telling the tree that it's now an under forest situation, and we're.
So you can theoretically do it, but it's not worth your time.
Right, exactly. It's better to pay that little extra bit of money and get a rootstock that'll.
Well, the other part we didn't say that's very, very valuable for homeowners in dwarfing rootstocks is that they're more precocious. That means that they set flower buds, and those flower buds set fruit sooner than on a full vigor tree. And so you get started sooner. In case of cherries, the dwarfing rootstocks for cherries, usually in their second year there's a few fruit, and in the third year you have a lot of fruit with the dwarfing rootstocks for cherries. However, the dwarfing rootstocks for cherries are not as dwarfing as the better rootstocks that we have for apples. So you can't keep a cherry tree on a dwarfing rootstock and say, well, it's dwarf, so it's going to be the same size as my apple tree. You have to read carefully to see what's the size of a tree will be on the particular dwarfing rootstock for the particular crop that you're trying to buy for.
Something Bob has already mentioned is when you're looking for plants to plant, you really have to be proactive. You have to figure out in the area you live in, and I'll say, for us, Western North Carolina, what are the major diseases? Especially if you're not doing it organically, you can get toxic stuff and, blow your whole ecosystem out. But doing it conscientiously, what are the major diseases? And that's gonna help you pick out what particular fruits to get, because you want to get the ones that are resistant to those diseases. Still gonna be a struggle to grow them and fruit them and all that, but at least you don't have that major issue with apples and pears and the pome family like fire blight. It's the major disease issue here.
If you're really interested in this, there's a whole wealth of information of things to be thought about, because we've talked a little bit about just the ecology of what's going on in the root zone here, and he's begun the process of talking about the diseases and pests that may attack the top, and in this case we were talking about the black cherry aphid as being one of the serious ones, and the borers that can attack the bottom. So there's quite a lot to be thought about in terms of the agroecosystem that we're trying to develop to be sustainable in our backyard or in our small acreage orchard that is mostly probably for you and your neighbors. It's probably not a business for income.
Bob, you were talking about the dwarfing cherry rootstock. Where, if I wanted to get that, would you be able to tell me where I would source that from?
No, I just have to tell you the names of those kind of rootstocks, and you go Google the name of the rootstock, and the nurseries will start to pop up that have that rootstock. Well, probably the most commonly available right now are called Gisela. It's a German word, and Gisela, but there's a range of different kinds of rootstocks for cherries in terms of how big they would be if they're on the Gisela rootstocks. And the smallest one that's most available is called Gisela 5. And it probably can be purchased relatively easily. There's a new Russian rootstock, Krymsk, and Krmysk.
Wow.
Krymsk is the name of a city in down just north of Georgia, in north of Turkey, along the Black Sea, and it's a fruit production region of Russia. And the reason that there's such an interest in them in the United States right now is that the rootstocks from that experiment station were developed during the Cold War era, and they were done in a manner that didn't use pesticides in any way, and actually they just stuck sticks in the ground of the different ones that they were breeding to see how easily they would root and how well they would tolerate the soil pathogens and pests that were there. And so there's quite a lot of interest in their natural tolerance to some of the pests that are, and trying to find out whether they're going to be tolerant to the pests that are in North America as well as to that area around the Black Sea. So Krymsk and Gisela are the two that are most readily available for cherry rootstocks.
And you said that typically a cherry will be, what, 40 to 60 feet?
I said that cherries on full vigor rootstocks like Mazard, Mahaleb, left unpruned, could easily be 30 to 40 feet tall, even if they weren't crowded like a forest tree is and seeking light. Their natural growth habit is to be upward, with apical dominance taking them upward, and they spread some, but they easily could be 30 to 40 feet high and 30 to 40 feet wide. And so he brought his ladder. We couldn't reach 30 to 40 feet, but most people that would have an orchard on full vigor, and there are some in the eastern United States that are purposely in the mountains with cherry trees to do this, they saw them with chainsaws and cut them off at about the height that they can safely feel that people could be on ladders to work on them, and that's about 20 feet.
It has a lot of this. Is that indicative of it being problematic, or that's just something I should expect to see?
No, they're just lichens.
Okay.
That's maybe indicative that this is a zone of humidity here.
Oh, okay.
But the indicator of whether or not it's got good live viability in that one part that's growing is what I talked about, how much extension growth it's making in its new growth this season. And if we could then stay on peaches just a little bit longer, introduce the concept that different fruit crops flower and fruit differently in terms of the wood that they're producing the crop on, and the peach is easiest to explain. It only has fruit on the wood that grew last year. So you have to grow new wood to have new peach flowers. So Patrick hadn't been pruning this very much, and it was dying back some, and it's reacting really strongly and positively to the pruning that we did, and in that it's got all of this new growth. It's a little bit too strong, but that's because we made pretty big cuts and we've had a lot of rain and there's a fair amount of fertility in this soil and things.
And we haven't pruned it at all.
In the past.
It hasn't been pruned since I've been
right. Okay, so peach is about the easiest to say how it flowers and fruits. The only thing I don't see very many peaches on this. Right above Patrick's head, there's a one I would call a button or a nubbin beside a good peach. Do you see some more, Will? Okay, good. Well, that's good. Most home orchardists, when it gets to July in this area and it's already grown 6 feet, they're going to get concerned about, well, is it really making flower buds on that six feet of growth that it's making? Should I be doing something to that 6-foot sucker that's growing up there? And the answer is yes. If you know, a pruning response to cutting something partially in two is that at every leaf bud there's a shoot bud, and when you cut it partially in two or a third of it off, some of the leaf buds right at the base of them, those shoot buds will grow and grow laterally. And so in this case, when those suckers start to get much more than 3 feet long or so, or 4 feet, you probably cut them in half and cause it to have some lateral growth instead of just having those fishing
When you
poles.
say half, you mean tip prune them?
No, I actually
You mean
meant
split it?
I actually meant to cut it there.
Yeah, when you said split, I think of longitudinally. Yeah, no.
No, not that way.
Okay, I just meant to cut it
Yeah.
a third or a half, and
Yeah,
then
yeah.
and then at these leaf leaf
right.
axils, shoots will come out.
I'm with you.
So it's responding to the hard pruning that we gave it. I wasn't here during bloom time to see how much bloom happened out in here in this part of the orchard. I mean, this part of this tree, and I'm trying to see up in here to see how many fruit are actually up in that part. Not much. So I don't know really why there was such a minor set. Now you should be asking.
There were flowers on it. We actually were cutting and leaving flowers on it when we did it.
Oh, that's right. We were. Okay. Well. So you should be thinking now. Well, instead of me telling you what you should be thinking, what are you thinking about why this doesn't have any peaches?
Well, somebody just made a good call. We did get a very late frost. We got a frost on the 19th, I think, or 18th.
And that's what I was thinking probably happened, because you don't have much of an apple crop either.
Yeah, I think we got nailed with a late frost. That was
If we hadn't had the frost, is that this peach probably was healthy enough and had enough flowers from last year's wood that we should have had the situation where we had to get fruit size of the kind the juicy kind that you want to have, that are 2.5 to 3 to 3.5 inches in diameter. What you have to have is a rule of thumb, and the rule of thumb I have, Patrick, is if you want to have 3-inch peaches, my hand anyway is 10 inches from here to here, and 10 inches between the fruit will give you 3-inch peaches. So you take off all the ones that are in between here and here with my hand. And if you want to have 2-inch peaches, then you don't spread it that way. You do it this way, and that's 6 inches, and that's 2-inch peaches. And you take off everything that's between here and here. What's hard to believe when there are only about 20 fruit, maybe 10 fruit on the whole tree, that you have to do that. But this tree has the capability of weighting the branches right down onto the ground if you left them all on, and they would hardly be edible because they would be just a little bit of flesh around a stone.
Yeah.
And if you took off either using one or the other of my 2 rules of thumb, either from thumb to little finger or from index finger to thumb, depending on what size you're wanting, if you have to do that, or you're going to have little fruit that is not much more than the pit in the case of how peaches are actually grown. And
So these should be 15-inch peaches then, huh?
they should be 4.
Yeah,
They should
yeah.
be 4, Andrew.
Yeah,
That's right.
yeah.
These 10 that are on there should be 4. But what will happen is that they'll make split pits. What that is the pit actually is growing so fast, and there's so much energy in the root and the tree that it actually breaks the pit open. And I'm sure, bought nectarines and peaches that when you buy them at the store, you can kind of tell if you look at them carefully that they look kind of like they're a double. And then when you cut into them, they just fall right open, the stone. Yeah. So that's a split pit.
Yeah.
And that's what will happen to a tree like this where it has such a light crop, is almost all of the fruit here will be split pits. That doesn't mean they won't be edible. But
we got to keep the brown rot off before we
yeah.
Is there root considerations like the root size for proximity? You know, if you get the trees too close, they're going to be sharing the same soil area as well.
Well, when you learn about soil ecology, you find out that in a healthy system, that's what they do anyway. They share resources and they're all linked up as one unit. There's some incredible soil science studies going on these days, or about the linkedness of a community of plants. Yeah.
And
So
that in the case of many commercial orchards, purposely are planted to compete with each other to help reduce the vigor of the orchard. They're planted in spacings that will cause them to compete with each other in the root zone.
What about the cherry trees? Some of our, they say, are naturally dwarfed. Smaller
Well,
trees
that's a question that's very much like what we were talking about between the difference between these two kinds of apples. Sour cherries, for the most part, are a different species of cherry than Prunus avium, the peach. Prunus cerasus is a naturally smaller tree, and so it never is going to get 40 feet tall. It only gets to 25 feet tall.
There's some sweet ones too that are naturally dwarfed, like Stella. Isn't Stella?
Well, that's interesting that you call that naturally dwarfed.
I don't know.
That it's
Isn't that-
well,
that's what they say.
it's dwarfed by the same reason that this tree and this tree are different. It's dwarfed by the fact that plant breeders have purposely looked for types that have a short internode between the nodes and that have an upright growth habit. And so they looked for those in cherries, and there are 2 or 3. There's a variety named Celeste with a C that is intermediate in its effect like that. So your question is good. I don't necessarily call that natural. It's in its genetics, but it was purposely selected to be that way by. Whereas the sour cherry and the sweet cherry difference, that is natural, that the species of Prunus cerasus doesn't make as big a tree naturally as what a Prunus avium tree, a sweet cherry tree, does. So your question is wonderful.